Let's go in the talking room.
My friend Traci Des Jardins is an award-winning chef and restaurateur. Tracy was a finalist on Top Chef Masters and is a semi-finalist for this year's James Beard Award for Outstanding Chef. I invited Tracy to the talking room to talk about her cooking ethos, the challenge of managing restaurants, and her approach to crafting new recipes. Hey, welcome to the talking room. Tracy, welcome to the talking room.
Thank you.
Thank you
nice
so
to
much
be here.
for coming. I want to ask you how it's going because I know you have a lot of irons in the fire,
so to speak.
Give a terrible
Yes.
pun. You are officially a restaurateur.
It's true.
How
It's
many
true.
restaurants do you have now?
I am up to 5 right now.
The two Mojitas,
2 mojitos.
Jardiniere, Public House,
Yes.
and
The commissary.
the
in
commissary.
Presidio,
And the
which
commissary is
is
brand new,
brand new. Not even 2 months old.
so it's a baby.
It is a baby and it's just like a newborn. Very, very needy.
Apparently, you have a bunch of hunters in your family.
I do. Yeah. I grew up.
Is
yeah.
it multi-generational?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and hunting accidents sometimes ended up with some interesting culinary fodder, if you
Like
will.
shooting the wrong animal?
Yeah,
and then having
because
to
that
eat
was
that.
the rule. The rule was if you killed it, you had to eat it.
That's a really good rule.
And I didn't. Wasn't really a gun handler. I didn't really enjoy it. I mean, I definitely killed a few things when I was younger, but then I realized I didn't really have much of a taste for it. But my brother liked to kill birds, and he killed a bunch of blackbirds one day, and with a shotgun. And so you shoot into a big swarm of blackbirds.
Oh, man.
And lots of them fall down. And so he
4 and 20?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And he had to pluck them all and prepare them all and eat them all, So it was like you didn't get to just run around killing things and for fun and squirrels, whatever, So we ate lots of strange things.
I mean, it's very sort of conservation-minded for the 70s.
Well, hunters are big conservationists.
Really?
I mean, I think the hunters get a real bad rap. But if you sort of look at like Ducks Unlimited, which is the duck club for duck hunters,
Right.
They do all kinds of water conservation and waterfowl conservation. I mean, they want to preserve those birds for their own purposes. But it's kind of interesting.
You're
juxtaposition.
reminding me, of course, that I forgot, but that Teddy Roosevelt started the national parks specifically to have a place to go hunting.
Hunting, right. Yeah, you're preserving those species so that you can do with them what you want to do with them. But it's,
Do you remember the first time you had to butcher something?
Gosh, I mean, when I was little, I used to pluck birds and...
So that was just always part of the...
I was part of it, yeah. I mean, I went to a slaughterhouse for the first time when I was like 9, and I grew up in, a rural area, so, we killed animals. I mean,
Right.
it was, you saw things slaughtered, and I mean, it doesn't bother me that much.
Now, your son is 14, 15?
He's 14,
14. What kind of eater is he?
He eats pretty much anything, yeah. I mean, I've always taught him from the time he was little, like, what is beef? It's cow. I mean, I want him to be connected to, this idea of eating animals.
Yeah.
I think it's really important that people have a connection to that a life has been given for the steak that's on your plate. And
Yeah.
I used to try to kind of drive that point home all the time. And one of my favorite questions is, if you had to kill what you eat, what would you eat?
Yeah, fish is an easy one.
Right. Yeah. But it's sort of like if you take that and you apply it to, could I kill a cow?
Right.
Could I kill a pig?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it would be really, really hard to kill a pig, but I'm pretty motivated by bacon, and I'm sure that I could, learn to do it.
I would like to imagine that I could. I know that I don't think I'd have any problem with the chicken, but I think moving up from that in the
Yeah.
food chain would get successively more and more upsetting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something you have to get used to. It's not easy, and I don't think it should be easy.
No.
But I think that you could, learn to sort of emotionally deal with that. But I think that people should think about it. I think people should really think about that.
Does your son show any? I don't want to say, everyone always says, oh, does he show proclivities in the kitchen? But you're not just a chef, you're a problem solver, you're a manager of people. Has he taken some of your skill set and looks like he might be going somewhere different with it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a work ethic. I work really hard still. I love what I do. I think those things are really important things for him to know and to feel good about. He likes to work also, and one day he was sort of complaining about it, and I was like, what are you talking about? I'm like, you love to work. Like you love to, you have a list of tasks that you have to do. And, so he learns those things. He's not going to be a chef or a restaurateur. I wouldn't want him to be, I don't think. I mean, I think he's going to have to find his own thing. But I think that the work ethic of not being afraid of hard work, so people have this sort of feeling like it's not the right thing to do with your life, like working hard is bad in some way, or there's some easy way.
Or that the goal is to not work.
Yeah, and that's a worthy goal. I mean, having time off is great.
Yeah.
But if you love what you do, working hard is it's part of me. It's and I enjoy it.
Yeah, it is its own reward in a lot of ways. Although, I mean, you and I have been talking lately about how maybe we're too busy. Yeah,
I mean, when you start having to give things up, time with people or peace of mind or sort of your mental space, that's when it's too much.
That balance,
you're sacrificing.
It's really hard to find the balance of quiet in the maelstrom.
It recently, opening a new restaurant, and I kind of really dove into it and working every night, which I haven't done in a long time. And I realized how sort of simple my life was when that's what I did. I didn't have a lot of friends. I didn't have a social life. I mean, if people wanted to see me, they had to come to the restaurants.
Right.
And life was kind of simple, and I kind of liked that. I mean, now it's much more complex, where I have, social obligations and other things that I have, other obligations that I have to speak to.
Steven Spielberg at some point was saying the reason all those movies from the late 70s and the early 80s are so amazing is that they were all single.
Yeah.
All those filmmakers, they didn't have families. They were just going 25 hours a day.
And those competing demands it's difficult. When you feel like you're neglecting some part of your life, whether it's, your partner or your kids or, some aspect of your life because you are working, that's when I get sort of conflicted. And it's like,
I do too, because I don't feel like I want to give any of those things up.
Right.
I just want to find a balance that
makes sense,
properly delivers the right amount of energy from me to all of those things.
Right.
That they feel like they're all well served. Is there one appearance that you've done on television that stands out as either the craziest or the most satisfying? I mean, it's always a slog. It's always more work than you think it's going to be, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Top Chef Masters was intense because we filmed that 23 days in a row.
A whole season in 23 days?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Do you have a day off or two in there?
You had a couple days where they were just doing interviews, so we weren't actually cooking, but you were being interviewed for hours and hours and hours.
Oh, my God.
So it was, but we didn't have a real day off, no.
After 23 days, I'd feel like reality would start to bend inward on itself.
Oh, yeah, and you're staying in a hotel, and you're just going back and forth from set to hotel. Yeah, it completely. But I kind of put myself in that mindset. I was like, okay, I don't want to be distracted by the restaurants and everything I do every day. I wanted to kind of be in that
But
show.
You also know that you can let your restaurant be going, and it's going to go pretty much okay while you're gone.
Yeah.
That's also intense.
Mm-hmm.
And you were in Top Chef Masters with your best friend, Mary Sue?
Yep, Mary Sue.
I mean, I know you're both competitive, but you're both competitive without being mean. I don't know, it's a rare combination. Did there get some sticky points in your friendship?
Not really in our friendship. I mean, we were very supportive of each other, but it was definitely volatile. So we had a couple of, fights where, more was probably about one of us wanting to bail out and the other one being like, no, you're going to pull it together. You're going to stay in this. You're not leaving me here. Like, I'm not going to let you go without me. And it was interesting because we both ended up going all the way to the end, that it worked out that way.
Yeah.
Because, she was sure she was going to be the first one off the island. And you
were the quiet storm in that show, like you sort of in the background, and then
I tried to hit the middle, because if you think about it, like if you hit the middle, you don't get kicked off. It's like don't take too many risks, just kind of go and stay on. I tend to be like a super emotional person, so my whole goal was to not be caught crying on the show. And so I was like, if I get kicked off, I don't want to cry on camera. That's like what I don't want to have happen.
Right.
And I think that's why I made it to the final, actually.
Oh, nice.
That's a joke.
When you say just right,
but it's actually true.
You won
too,
just right.
Yeah.
You must have come to a dish here and there where it's trivial for you to make it, but you can't teach anyone else how to do it right?
The more simple something is, I think the harder it is actually to teach someone else how to do it.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, it's, those dishes that you see that are sort of, I don't know, that have 4 or 5 ingredients. I think those are the ones that are really hard to nail. And it's a lot of times you'll be working with a cook and they can't quite wrap their head around it, and
Is it too simple, or the
too simple, or even just sort of the presentation, like something that's random on a plate.
Right.
It's much harder to get someone to do something that's random than something that's very, very precise. That's actually the hard stuff to get cooks to understand, is sort of just make it look pretty, but don't make it look too contrived. That does not
how they've been
necessarily
trained?
translate. Yeah.
I asked you about this last night, and I wanted to delve into it a little further, but are there dishes that you invent, they taste great, and then once they're on the line turn out to be such a pain in the ass to make or to keep fresh or something, or that they become like, boy, I hope not a lot of people order this tonight?
Yeah, I mean, there are some things that are really painstaking, like the little anchovies. Those things are such a prep, nightmare. You have to scale them first, and then you have to gut them, and you have to take out the backbone, and it's really...
And by the time I'm done with it, it's like 7 pieces of fish.
Yeah, exactly. And so, those things they're painstaking. I mean, it's, fava beans. Fresh garbanzo beans, it's like these things that the labor, if you wanted to serve, 10 people in your kitchen at home and you had to prep them, you would not be having a good time.
We've had that experience here, but no one ever writes in cookbooks that this is a pain in the ass, even though it's a good reward.
Yeah, well, I find it like sort of a Zen meditation. I mean, I can do something that's really tedious for hours and hours and hours in a kitchen, and I find it very relaxing and peaceful. I guess that's why I do what I do. And I would imagine bakers are probably like that too, because they're repeating over and over and over again.
And refine, but again, I bet they're probably also refining each time by a degree and by a minute here and there.
Yeah, and I was talking to someone who had learned to bake from Chad at Tartine, and about the sort of the mood, like the weather has a huge impact.
Right.
And the products, there are slight variations. And so you have to sort of, there are these factors that come into play that you have to sort of read and refine while you're doing it.
Do they keep journals for that?
I would imagine that they do, yeah. But the weather definitely has impact, if it's really humid outside or, something. Those are all going to have impact on your batches. And
that hadn't occurred to me. In special effects, there's a type of makeup foam called SRAM, and it's effectively like makeup sponge. But in order to properly cast it to the same consistency, it's like 7 ingredients, and they're all adjusted according to the temperature and the humidity and multiple other factors of what the final product you want to get. And every good SRAM caster has a journal of every single time they've cast it and what the conditions were, so they can refer back to it and adjust their mixture accordingly.
And so do they actually measure like the humidity in the air and that?
Yeah, it's like a key part of their process to do it.
Yeah, see, so many things are done in cooking that are intuitive, and then you need a scientist to sort of explain to you like what these things are that you sort of know intuitively.
And you still, even though you're doing this all the time, you still cook for yourself.
Yeah.
It's not a busman's holiday. You actually are.
Oh no, I love to cook at home. I mean, for the first 20 years of my professional career, I never cooked at home because I was just so exhausted and, working 6 nights a week. And, that's all I did was cook. But as I've become more of a business person and less in the day-to-day grind of the kitchen, I enjoy cooking, more at home than I ever have before. So, and it's a totally different expression and experience, which is kind of interesting because I cooked when I was young, but I didn't cook professionally. So now, after all these years of training, to kind of then come back home.
Oh, right. You're top and tailing it. It's
yeah.
Really
so
cool.
It's a totally different, experience of cooking.
Do you have some staple comfort foods?
Yeah, I love to grill. I mean, I'm obsessed with like cooking on live fire. There's this great restaurant in Spain where the guy makes his own charcoal, and he makes like 10 different kinds of charcoal. So he takes wood and burns it down, and then he's got all of these different. The whole kitchen is a series of different kinds of grills.
Oh, wow.
And that's all he does there, and it's
The smoke management must be a nightmare.
Yeah, but I think I don't know how, I think he's using like really hard woods and it's not like super, super smoky. I don't know.
Wow,
I mean, I don't know
okay.
what his ventilation system is and as versus what we do here, but it's interesting. It's not quite what you would think. It's not like a barbecue joint.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't have that feeling at all.
When you're cooking at home, is that also sometimes part of your gestation process for a new dish? Do you actually try something out or get an idea for something?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean,
It's just always
tinkering
percolating.
around. Yeah, and it's you're just sort of compiling all that information and experience.
How many employees across all 5 restaurants right now?
Let's see. Well, I own the 2 restaurants, and
Right.
so those 2 combined are around 130, something like that. So yeah, so those are all mine. And then across the board in the other restaurants, wow, 250 or something like that.
I had no idea it was that many.
Yeah.
It's a dynasty.
Yeah, it's a lot of people. Yeah.
I like the idea that you're building a culture of reasonable kitchen behavior instead of the
Trying. It's
extreme-
always a work in
I know,
progress.
I can imagine. Is there like one thing that your staff knows just never to subject you to in terms of a behavior? Like there's just a thing that like you can't deal with in the kitchen?
I have a legendary nose, so I can walk into the kitchen and, I can smell if there's something that's just not quite right. If, I'm, super, super picky. So it's
fascinating.
Yeah. And I'll pick
Something's
up
overcooked or undercooked or
burnt,
off
off, fish. I'm like, a maniac about fish. And so
it's
it's
impossible
like,
to cook fish, in my experience. You grew up in a family that cooked a lot. Your grandmother?
My whole family.
Your whole family.
Everybody. Mexican grandparents. My grandmother used to make fresh tortillas every day.
Every day.
Yeah, and my grandfather used to make, menudo. My mom actually had a stove in the garage for him because my grandmother wouldn't let him cook tripe in the house because it smelled so bad. So he had to cook it out in the garage.
What was the first thing you learned how to cook, or do you remember?
Well, I was making, let's see, my older brother went to kindergarten when he was 5, and so I started making chocolate chip cookies with my mom when I was 3.
Oh, wow.
And I think by the time I was about 4, I could do it on my own without, I couldn't bake them, but I could make the whole, I could make the dough and she would bake them for me. So that was my first thing that I cooked were chocolate chip cookies.
What is the first thing you cooked that you felt was yours, that you'd put your own spin on?
I remember when I was about 15, I lived in this really small town, 3,500 people in the Central Valley, and was bored out of my skull. And so I took up cooking as a hobby, and I had Bon Appetit and Gourmet and, the food magazines. And so I remember I picked out this Easter feast. I could probably figure out like what issue it was based on the date. And I decided to make this really elaborate meal for my parents for, I don't know, was it their anniversary or something like that? That's probably about right because it was just after Easter. And it was this multi-course, like 8 courses. And I had to drive 45 minutes to Fresno to find a lot of the ingredients and, put this whole thing together. So I was pretty in it as a hobby.
That's like a day-long or multi-day?
Yeah, multi-day, thing. And I didn't really think about it as a career at that point. It was just something that I was really passionate about and loved to do. And so I sort of spent my high school years as a hobby cook, working through those magazines and making stuff that, I would see in there.
Where was the point at which you realized you could actually go do this for a living?
I went to college. I graduated from high school early, a year early.
Because you couldn't stand it, or you were
because
really
I could.
smart?
I was done. Yeah, I just was like, I figured that out when I was a freshman in high school, and went to my principal and said, okay, this is how I'm going to graduate in 3 years with, night school and summer school and work study and all these things. And I just presented this plan to graduate full credit in 3 years. And so I was like, I got to get out of here. So I graduated at 16 and went right into UC Santa Cruz. And my cousins at this point were all graduating from Berkeley. They all went to Berkeley, and they were, psychologists and history and anthropology. And, they were graduating. They had absolutely no idea what they were going to do. And I just was looking at this whole thing, and I was like, this doesn't make any sense. I wanted to study sciences and maybe go to vet school. I was always a really huge animal person, and that was what I thought I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And then I got into college, and I was like, God, I don't know about the sciences, like what it's going to take.
All the prerequisites.
Yeah, all the prerequisites to go through that. So I thought, well, I don't know if that's really what I want to do, but I love to cook, and I was a skier also. And so I thought, I want to cook and be a ski bum for a while. I thought, my parents aren't going to support me being a ski bum, but if I, learn to be a cook, I can just go any place and I'll be able to hang out and ski and do this thing that I love to do.
It's like you want to be Cato.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, exactly. But then I didn't ski for like 15 years because I ended up in a very, very serious kitchen. And
where was that?
That was at 7th Street Bistro in Los Angeles with Joachim Splichel, who had just come over from 2-star Michelin in Nice, the Hotel Negresco, and he was working for Jacques Maxima, who was pretty much one of the best chefs working in France at that moment in time. And he had just come over and was just about to open his first restaurant. And I connected with him through family connections, and he said, I'll give you a shot. I applied to some culinary schools, to CCA. I didn't get in, which is really funny. I always love to remind anyone that will listen of that. You didn't let me into CCA. And so I started a traditional apprenticeship with a great French chef. And
how did that conversation go? I mean, that's a bold move.
Yeah, I mean, I was literally 17 when I started working for him. And I think I was just so naive. I just didn't have any idea what I was getting myself into. But I knew that I loved it. I mean, I remember watching him prepare food for a photo shoot like the third day that I was ever working in a commercial kitchen. And I was like, okay, this is it. And there's no question in my mind whatsoever. Wow. This is what I want to do.
You loved the culture. You loved the energy.
Yeah. And I mean, I started working really hard from day one. I mean, it was... I probably broke all kinds of child labor laws. I mean, I realize now, it was like I wasn't even 18 yet.
Right.
And, I was working, right out of the gate 14, 15 hours a day, and did so for, 20 years.
Wow. Was there a point in that first few months or that first couple of years where he said, I think you might have something?
Well, he actually said it right away because I came to him through family connections, and so he thought I was going to be this little whatever, spoiled, kid. And he said, well, I'll give you 2 weeks, and you have to prove yourself in 2 weeks, otherwise you're out. And there were 5 or 6 of us that were in that category when we opened that restaurant.
Breed of...
Yeah, this is like I'm going to take all these kids and see what happens. And but yeah, a bunch of them got weeded out, and I got to stay. So he declared. He said no. And that's the thing you were asking earlier. If you can see that that talent, you can see it pretty quickly in people.
Really,
I think you can a couple days in the kitchen, even with somebody that has no experience. How their mind works, how they approach things, how they organize themselves. You can see those glimmers of somebody that's going to be successful.
When he saw that, did you get bits of encouragement from? How long did you work for him?
God, I worked with him on and off for about 10 years.
Oh, wow.
So,
okay.
Yeah, he was my mentor. He was the person who kind of formed my career and, sent me in the direction that I ended up going in.
Did he send you on stages?
He did. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he said, after the 2 weeks were over, he said, yeah, you definitely are very talented, and you're going to stay with me for 2.5 years, and then I'm going to send you to France.
Oh, wow.
So that was, it was his plan for me, which was, kind of a traditional, apprenticeship. That's
right.
Kind of the way it was done back in the day. If you didn't go to culinary school or, hotel school, you did a series of apprenticeships and then, went off and...
So at 19, you went to France.
I went to France at 19, yeah.
How long did you stay there?
I stayed there for a year and a half in all, but 2 different tours with a stint in New York in between.
Was there a shock at seeing a different kitchen? What was the difference like? You got 2.5 years at the kitchen in LA, and he sends you to France. Is there a, oh my God, I wasn't prepared for this moment?
No, or? The training that I got working for Joachim was pretty amazing. He was running a pretty high-powered kitchen. It was, I think back on it, and we had 6 or 7 different tasting menus.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I could show you one of those menus, and you would be like, you were doing this in 1983. I mean, it was really intense, and all these fish imported from France, and it was chocolate bakery, a place where we produced chocolates. I mean, it was a full-on big French establishment, and pretty amazing. I mean, it was so I was pretty well prepared, but at that point in time, restaurants like the French Laundry and Per Se and Alania just didn't exist here. And so if you wanted that kind of experience, you had to go abroad. It didn't exist here. And it really didn't exist, I mean, a little bit outside of France, but mostly everything was happening in France at that point in time.
And when you said a brief stint in New York, what was that for? Yeah.
I just wanted to check out New York, and a friend who lived there had an apartment available, and so I came back from France, I think probably to redo a visa or something, and was in New York and ended up staying there for a year and a half, which was amazing.
You worked for a restaurant there.
Yeah, I worked for Drew Neoporn at Montrachet in New York, and that was amazing too.
In my experience, in my life, of course, everyone's life looks linear in retrospect.
Right.
But it's never that way when you're actually going through it. And the ways in which certain things actually guided me forward were not very expected. Are there things you learned or were told early on that still resonate to you as you're opening new places and guiding people and managing your staff?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I worked in so many really amazing restaurants, and I mean, that's the thing that I would tell somebody, work for amazing people, knock on the door, make it happen, go, be aspirational and dream big. I mean, I worked in well, let's see, they all became 3-star Michelin restaurants, but at the time, there were 2 2-star Michelin restaurants and 2 3-star Michelin restaurants. So, I was working in the big fancy houses that, no one would think. I mean, I was always the only American. There was one other American that I encountered in all that time in France.
Oh, wow.
I was always the only woman.
I was going to say, you also had to be in the minority. It's a very male-dominated culture, the kitchen.
Yeah, I mean, there was never another woman in any of the kitchens I worked in France. I didn't speak any French when I went. I mean, I think I was so naive. I was just so I was stupid almost, It was just sort of like, oh yeah, I can do this. And I could, and I did, but it wasn't easy for sure.
Duke Ellington in his autobiography said, well, some friends of mine called me up and they asked me to write the music for this musical they were doing, and I didn't know you couldn't do that in a weekend, so I did.
Right. Yeah, that is exactly, yeah. Often I'm asked by, young women, well, how do you get over the obstacles? And don't focus on them. I mean, it just isn't, I never thought that I couldn't do it. I mean, It wasn't, I didn't think about what the obstacles were going to be that were in my way. It was, I thought about what I wanted, and...
But there are obstacals, right? There is prejudice, there is sexism,
Absolutely.
There is verbal abuse in bombastic kitchens. How do you tune that stuff out?
Well, actually being in a foreign kitchen was kind of convenient because I could pretend like I didn't understand. I understood all of it, but it was easy to tune it out and just to, act like I didn't hear the horrible things people would say, and just...
Were you methodical about learning new skills? Are they responsible for showing you new things? Or I just wonder about a stage. Could they put you on the line and just have you do the same thing for the whole time you're there?
Sure. They could, throw you in a dungeon cleaning mushrooms, I mean, I did a fair bit of that, in addition to other things that were more interesting. But, kind of ran the gamut. I mean, some of it was sort of, menial, repetitious stuff. And then other times there were opportunities that opened up and you could kind of wiggle into them and
if you'd earn the right by doing a lot of the menial stuff.
Yeah, and being there, showing up, being steadfast and curious and engaged and responsible and all of those things. But I had a lot to prove. It wasn't they didn't think I was going to be fabulous.
Yeah, I've always found I get asked what advice do you have, and I always say that what I did was I pointed at the stuff that I was interested in. I kept on saying I want to try that.
Right.
And you do, 90% of everything you do is total tedium. And there's nothing interesting about it. Yeah, but that last 10% that you've earned the right to by doing it.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's, if somebody gives you, 5 cases of leeks and says, cut these into the same size tiny little squares, that's your job, so you approach that and you learn how to do that, and you do it well, and you do it with enthusiasm, and then they see that you do that, and then they might let you do something that's a little bit more interesting. And that's kind of the way it works in kitchens. And I don't know, people always are amazed by my knife skills. And I said, well, you too would have good knife skills if you stood doing this for 16 hours a day for, 20 years. Yeah.
Did you start out thinking, oh, I totally want to own restaurants, plural?
No, not at all. Back in the day, in the 80s when I first started cooking, chefs were always in their restaurants. So they were there every night. That was a big part of the experience of a restaurant. And that's just the way it was done. And now everything's changed with chefs having multiple operations and, empires. And so the whole world has changed completely since
But
I
I get the idea that you are very involved with all of the restaurants. I mean, you have a steady hand in each one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm present with my management team and, constant contact with them and know what's going on with the menus and quality control and any kind of creative, development ideas I'm always playing a part in. So yeah, it's a very active role for sure. Okay. And they're all here, so I don't fly around so much like many of my colleagues do.
Okay, so take me through, you had Jardiniere for years, and then you decided to open a second place?
Yeah, so I had Jardiniere, let's see, I was about 5 years in when I opened Acme, which was at the ballpark. That was a precursor to Public House and Mijita there. So that was the second one, actually. And that was a consultancy, so it wasn't mine. And then Mijita was actually the second one that I opened as my own restaurant. So
but the consultancies, you put your name on it?
Yeah, you put your name on it, and you do the whole concept, and you're working with ownership to provide them with consultation, basically.
But so if it wasn't part of the original plan, what lured you to try it? Was it? I mean, it's not because you didn't have enough to do already with one restaurant.
No, I mean, you could certainly work more than full time at one restaurant.
Yeah.
Everybody pretty much does. I guess, the restaurants become an expression of myself and sort of the different styles of cuisine that I'm interested in and want to, play around with. And then, also the different, access points, if that makes sense. It's, it was nice to do a concept that was much lower end. Sort of the precious world of high-end restaurants aren't necessarily accessible to everyone. And so, opening something like Mijita has a completely different demographic. It's a different expression of myself and says something different to the public and offers a different experience.
Does something happen sometimes in other restaurants that inform what you do at Jardiniere? Is that always the flagship?
Jardiniere is definitely the flagship. I mean, that was what, I was trained to do.
Yeah.
It was, everything that I did up until the point where I opened it informed that restaurant in particular. So everything from there is sort of a scaled back version, I guess, because that's the most formal and the most, sort of rigid and correlates most with my original training.
Right. So when we were first friends, I said, I had no idea how you run a restaurant. And you said, in a very offhand but direct way, no, you totally do. You run a TV show, and I don't know what that's like, but they're very similar in that you're good at what you do, and you can file down the rough patches and find good people and sort of make it happen. But it really comes down to good people, right? And finding a team of people that can
absolutely
keep a place running. So
every element is just as important as another one. I mean, just like television production, right? I mean, you have to have the right camera person and sound person, and every aspect of it has an impact on what that final product is. So, I mean, if you go into a restaurant and, your first contact point with a restaurant is usually the phone.
Yeah.
So if you have a bad, person that's answering the phone and they're not nice to you, you've already had a bad experience before you've even set foot in the restaurant. So, right?
Yeah, I know.
And you may not even make it there. If someone doesn't answer the phone, or if they're not polite or engaging or accommodating, then, you've already lost them at that point. So
is this something that you go through, like you call each place occasionally just to see?
Absolutely. I mean, not usually as sort of a, scheduled action, but, I inadvertently will always,
know what response you get.
Yeah.
So with the commissary being brand new and only 2 months old, what's the process like to find the team? Are you pulling people from other places that you have? And then also bringing in new people?
Yes, I mean, you try to work towards a foundation of people that you've worked with before who are, that you can really rely on to be the leaders in that environment. And that's part of expansion, is to try and really grow your team so that you can, have that foundation for moving forward. But then you have to hire a whole bunch of other people that you've never worked with before.
Sounds like a nightmare.
It is, I mean, particularly in this market right now. I mean, it's really, really tough.
Right, this is a food town, so everyone who is good has been snapped up.
And there are just literally dozens of restaurants opening right now in San Francisco. It's kind of staggering. I think that the people who, one of the primary suppliers of restaurant equipment and kitchens said that they're opening like 30 restaurants in the next, 3 months.
Oh my gosh.
So it really is just staggering.
So sometimes you don't have the luxury, if you've got someone who's a dud, of firing them.
No, I mean, it's, it's gotten to be, just really tough just to find, anybody these days.
I mean, even though you've done it now, however many times, half a dozen times, are there things that happen with the commissary that you didn't expect? Ways in which the opening taught you something new about opening a restaurant that you didn't encounter before?
Well, I mean, that the personnel factor has become a big one, which is, I think that most restaurateurs that you talk to right now, would say the same thing, which is that we're having to really train people from ground zero.
Where normally they'd show up with a bunch of skills.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, back in the day when we opened Jardiniere, we had, highly qualified restaurant waiters who had, been working in all the best restaurants that were sort of a similar vein. And so it was, really easy. You really only needed to teach them what your own personal style was. You didn't have to teach them everything. Now, we're actually in the position where sometimes we have to hire people that have never worked in restaurants before and train them how to be servers. So it's an interesting...
Yeah. I feel like when I'm in the shop, if I've got someone I don't know in front of me, and I could watch them almost drill a hole and put a bolt and know whether or not I could train them.
Right.
It's very quick. Some people are slow burners, but there's a certain type of person who I could watch them do something they've never done before and know whether I could train them. And if I could train them to do anything. So take me through, like, for someone working the line in your kitchen, is there like a signature move or a signature way in which someone could reveal to you their skill, their hidden...
Yeah, I mean, I have pretty good intuition, so I mean, I can sit down and have a conversation with someone and sort of start to figure out how their mind works. And that's going to be a pretty good indicator of how they're going to be in a kitchen. And you sort of, over the years, you can kind of profile people and sort of figure out, what is their process and how. I'm sure it's similar to what you're talking about.
Right, but there's two parts, right? There's a temperament and then there's skill.
Right.
And there's, like, you could have the skill but not the temperament, and that would be just as bad as having the temperament but not the skill.
Yeah, I mean, the temperament's probably harder to test for. I mean, that's something you would sort of see once you put them in action, is how they would react to something. And
some people like it and some people run screaming.
Yeah, I mean, because it's a wild environment. Restaurants are sort of unique in that that's what they are.
When you go to each of your restaurants, is there a way in which you can tell just by looking that things are running smoothly or they might not be running smoothly? Is there a metric?
Yeah, I mean, it's more of it's a little bit subjective. I can see it. I can see the cracks if things aren't firing on all cylinders. And sometimes it's just the feeling in the restaurant. I mean, restaurants have their own mood, and if it's not in a good mood that night, then it doesn't have the right vibe.
Right.
Which I'm sure as a consumer, you go in and you can experience that. Sometimes you just feel like things are off kilter. It might be your favorite restaurant you've been to a bunch of times, and you walk in one night and something's not quite right.
Well, I've been at a place with you where we got weird service at one point, and you gave them the benefit of the doubt. This is probably just an early night of this server, instead of thinking, this place isn't that great.
Yeah, I think sometimes we're more forgiving as restaurateurs than the average consumer.
Is each restaurant sort of, you've been thinking about things for a long time and thinking, oh, this is a place for that thing? Or are you thinking about the mood of the whole place and trying to slot recipes into it?
I think it's a little bit of both. The Presidio Project has been a really interesting one. It's Presidio of San Francisco. It's got this, this great history and thinking about that. So the concept sort of came by thinking about the history of the Presidio, which you had all the Spanish, influence there, and you drive across the Golden Gate Bridge, and you can't help but to think about, the Spanish ships coming into the bay, and that discovery, and then, then thinking about the product that we have here. And, just over the bridge in Marin, you've got all these farmers that are growing all this really cool stuff. And then you think about what's coming out of the bay, which sardines and anchovies and squid and, these kinds of fish that you find in Spain a lot. So it made sense. That was sort of the, how the whole idea developed, and how I decided I wanted to do Spanish food was kind of, all that kind of driving back and forth across the bridge over and over again, and kind of thinking about the San Francisco Bay. And
do you have another restaurant that's going off in your mind?
Well, I have another one that's coming down the pike. I'm opening another one in September.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, so there's another one coming right down the pike.
It's going to be a busy year.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Do you feel like as you keep going that your team gets more and more solid? The group of people that you have built around
Not
you?
necessarily.
No?
The wheel comes off every once in a while. You lose one, and it's to some degree. I mean, and you learn as you go, but it's still contingent on finding those great people and retaining them, and that's not always easy. There's a lot of people. There's poaching that goes on, and people are
Is there still a lot of
recruited.
poaching? I mean, even in San Francisco seems like a very small community, even though there's a bunch of restaurants.
People seem to have lost their ethics around that. I mean, it used to be that you really didn't do that. You didn't solicit someone from someone else's restaurant, but now. I don't know. People seem to use headhunters, and they think that absolves them of the responsibility somehow, which I don't think it does.
Right.
It's just, but it goes on a lot now, and I think it's because everybody's kind of desperate. It's really hard to find good people, and so
aren't people necessarily maybe coming from all over the world here to come work? I mean,
it would be nice, but we have immigration policy that makes that challenging for one thing. I mean, it's all kinds of different factors, and
I guess people talk a lot now about millennials having a bad work ethic, and I'm not positive it's true. I'm not positive that it's not just a bunch of people my age decrying the downfall of civilization as.
But it hasn't that been.
People always have.
Always have, yeah.
Have you noticed any? Have you noticed any generational shifts in work ethic as the years go by, or is it all pretty constant? It's hard to find that.
It's hard to say. I mean, it's, do people have the patience to learn a craft? I mean, you have many skills. You've learned, how to do a lot of things. I don't know. I mean, if you have someone apprentice in your shop, will they have the patience to take the time to learn to do all of the things that you know how to do? It's the same thing with cooking.
Right.
I mean, I feel like there are huge gaps in what I know. I mean, I never really studied charcuterie, thoroughly. I didn't study bread baking thoroughly. I didn't study pastry thoroughly. There's a lot to learn in the world of cooking.
I get the feeling the word thoroughly means something totally different to you than it does to me.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, for
iceberg.
me, it's a couple of years of doing something over and over and over again. I mean, those are the things I feel like I do know thoroughly, or the things that I've spent, a few years doing every day for long hours over and over again. Because that's how you learn.
Right.
You
You learn to be able to smell it and sense it and hear it in addition to tasting it.
Yeah, or the skills, like butchery. It's like you stand and break down animals for hours and hours and learn those knife skills. It takes time.
Has there been a point, I mean, there must have been a point or two where you get over it and you're exhausted and you have to fall back in love with the process?
Yeah, I mean, then, there's the issue of the body breaking down, it's like...
Taking care of yourself.
Yeah, taking care of yourself, and that, that balance, and it's hard, it's really, really hard work, and you have to stay fit, and, I've had surgery on both my hands for carpal tunnel, and, things that just have happened that, it's... Being a professional chef is like being a professional athlete, the wear and tear on your body of doing something for that many hours every day.
So 16, 17-year-old Tracy making elaborate dinners as hobbies versus Tracy now, are there things that you still make that take you right back to that time of the first time you cooked that dish, or the first time you experienced that taste?
Yeah, I mean, my memory is not great about all things, but when it comes to cooking, I can remember those moments of learning, certain things, and you do them again, and you think back to when you learned to do that 25 years ago.
Like an acid and a sweet or some sort of...
just certain techniques. And
you must have like a whole dictionary, a whole encyclopedia of taste matrices in your head. Are there?
I wish I'd been more detailed in my notes.
Really?
Yeah.
But you do have notebooks.
Yeah.
And they go back to the beginning?
Yeah, I mean, I was not as detailed as I would. I mean, that's one thing I would definitely tell, a young chef, or write every single thing down.
Every time you try something.
Yeah.
How it worked, what it tasted like.
But, I do remember most of it.
Do you turn it off when you go to eat at somebody's house?
Totally.
Or are you just always thinking about the tastes that are in?
No, I completely turn it off. I mean, I'm just so happy when people cook for me. I don't really care what it is. So I'm not going to be analytical about it. It's, I'm not thinking like a chef when I come to dinner.
But everyone else is thinking that you're a chef.
Yes, exactly. There's a lot of pressure in how you react to things, but no.
But you don't find that you're able to actually turn it on and turn it
off.
off.
Same with going to restaurants. I go through analytical periods where I'm thinking about what's going on, but then other times I don't want to be thinking about it. So I have to shut that part off and not think about, what's happening to the server, and are they nervous, or why did they forget my spoon, or whatever. I'm not necessarily judging the experience. I'm there to have a good time and not thinking about it from that perspective.
Well, and after having a lot of dinners with you, I've seen that you're just there to eat. But last night we were having dinner and the fish came, and it was such an interesting texture. I watched you really beating in on it and this is different. This is something interesting.
It's true, I did. Absolutely.
And do you think that may come up at some point in the future? You may weave
I was
that
thinking
into...
about that salmon this morning, actually, and making note of the fact that I haven't cooked with that method before, and so I don't know what she did exactly, and it's back there in my brain, so it's sort of simmering.
Is that something that goes into a notebook now, so that you remember it later, or is it just sits there percolating
it'll
on top?
just stay there percolating until I kind of work it through.
It's funny that it seems like if there's a thing that made you stand out at the beginning was you had some skills. You actually had some genuine intuition about the kitchen, but you also were just willing to bust your ass.
Yeah.
Was the busting your ass the thing that got you to stay past the 2 weeks more than the kitchen knowledge?
I think it was a combination, but I think I have the ability to organize myself really, really well. It's just sort of the way my mind works that happens to really mesh very well with being functional in a kitchen. So it's sequencing. It's
right.
It's about how I look at everything, and I've realized this only recently, that my snapshot of a task, or a timeline, or whatever it is, there's a matrix that I follow in everything that I do, and so I'm able to sort of layer in all these different details along the way, and that's just the way my mind works.
Right.
The course of a day, just a day, any day, how you organize yourself, and the things that you need to do and how that happens. It's the same thing in a kitchen.
But that's where a restaurant kitchen differs totally from a home kitchen, because you're sequencing across multiple things that all have to fit together.
And the details, widen from just the kitchen to every aspect of it. So, when everybody's arriving and all the things that need to happen and all the details that have to layer in for that moment, that production point where the show starts.
Yeah.
And when you're in charge, you have to have your mind around all of that stuff, all of the details that go into opening for service.
This is where my brain gets really bent, because I'm fascinated by it. The engineering of several hundred dinners in a single night. I mean, I know I'll chop a green or an herb to dress on something, and 45 minutes later, it's wilted and not as bright green as it was when I first brought it out. And you've got to manage that across a whole night in a hot kitchen.
Right. And, over the years figuring out, what it is, what is the herb, what needs to happen to it? How does it need to be cut? How does it need to be stored? How long can it last? At what point does it go into the dish and not, It's all those things
Right.
are, the millions of little details that we as, chefs, restaurateurs are orchestrating.
So is there? I'm wondering now. Is there a specific dish or a way to cook something that is just the best way, but impossible to translate into a kitchen because it's too time consuming or too specific?
I don't know the answer to that necessarily. I mean, I think
I remember
risotto would be a good example of like how do you take risotto and serve that in a restaurant, and how do you adapt that?
How do you take risotto?
Right. So I mean, I was once told that I made the best risotto ever by a non-Italian. So I think I do know how to do that. I mean, by a really kind of well-known food critic.
But you can't sit there and stir the whole risotto
No,
every time
you can't.
someone
And it
orders
really is better, if you cook it from start to finish. It's something I enjoy doing at home because it is something that you can do the right way.
Right.
You can't, I think that there are restaurants, I've never been to one, that specialize in risotto that actually do it from start to finish. I've never seen that in a restaurant. So
It takes an hour?
I think you have to have a lot of people because they've all got to be stirring their little pots, right?
Somebody can do two.
Yeah. If you're sort of ambidextrous, I guess. But so you take something like that and you say, okay, how do I come up with a product that I'm going to put on a plate that I feel good about, and what is the adaptation of that? And so the way that we do it is that we par cook it. So we cook it the right way,
right.
And we cook it to a certain point, and then we arrest that cooking point. So you have to stop it, because otherwise it's going to keep going, and then it's not going to be where you want it to be.
How do you stop it?
You just cool it off quickly. So you have to spread it out and then cool it down. Then you can repackage it and however you want so that it can be usable during service. And then you finish it. So it's
times how many ingredients, times how many?
Yeah, so everything is like that.
Right.
It's like there's certain things that you can cook from start to finish in a restaurant setting, but then there are a lot of things that you can't. And so you have to figure out the best way. What is that texture that you want on the end product, and how do you adapt that cooking method, time
to the engineering of the kitchen.
Right.
How is the process of birthing the commissary going? I mean, I know you've been incredibly busy of late. You've been there. Are you going through the same steps every night of refinement, or is it you're just there trying to put out fires?
It is refinement. It's creating a culture.
Culture of the staff?
Yeah, culture in the restaurant. I mean, and I don't know, I haven't figured out how you do that without just sort of being there and being, a force and a presence in the restaurant. I'm sure that there are other people that have figured out how to write manuals that teach people how to do those kinds of things, but I'm not there yet. I do that with my own presence, and that creating that culture amongst your management team, and then that sort of trickles down to the line staff and so on and so forth, so that you...
It's a lot, right? Like if you're really tired and you're in a bad mood, how do you adjust that to go into work?
Well, I think it's a little bit like acting. It's there's showtime, and you have to be up for that moment in time, and that that show that you put on every night. It is a lot like that. It's a lot like the theater. And you have to learn to sort of rise to that occasion where between 5 and 10 you're going to be serving guests, and as a chef you know that you have impact on the wait staff and the managers and so on and so forth. So all of your behavior has a reverberation in the restaurant, and you have that impact, and that's that's your presence there.
Do you sometimes resist sort of randomly walking into one of your places because you don't want to freak them out sometimes?
Oh yeah, definitely. Or if I'm in a bad mood, if I don't feel like I can put on that happy face and and be there and be nice to the guests and supportive of the staff and engaged, then I probably shouldn't walk through the doors.
Do you end up? I know that largely now I do a lot of my building in my head, and that what I actually do with my hands is just sort of following the drawings that are already in here. Do you find you do that with cooking? Like you start combining tastes and textures?
Yeah, the same kind of process happens in my head. I think different people have different ways of, approaching food, but the kind of foundation, dreaming about menus and combinations of flavors and all that all happens up in my head. And then it's informed by products that are available then, but the formulation of the ideas and the flavors, I'll work through dishes, and I do that a lot when I'm driving. And,
Really?
Yeah. And, sort of work through the textures and flavors and, kind of imagine what's happening in that plate.
You have a lot of people who used to work for you out with their own restaurants now. I mean, there's like a dozen or more in San Francisco. And that's sort of a key part of restaurant culture, right? You have good people that work for you and then they go off.
Yeah.
That's got to be a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
To lose your best people.
I can remember, probably the first time that I lost somebody that I really cared about, because you invest. I mean, you invest a lot of energy in teaching somebody, and and I think that the first time that I had somebody that I really had felt like I had done that work with, and they left me, it was just crushing. I mean, it was like breaking up. It was like really super sad, and you just didn't, you didn't want to see them go.
But it happened to you too, right? Like you worked
for
people who you went on to go do stuff, and that must have been. It's like it's part of this whole.
Yeah, and I mean it's not necessarily so that the best and brightest want to go on and do their own thing, but it's in the creative part of it, I think those people they want to get to a point where they're expressing their own creativity and and I've had some amazing people who have stayed with me, and they want that stability. They don't want to have to be all the things that a chef owner has to be. And so those are the ones that stick around. And, you get lucky sometimes and have somebody that stays for a long time that's just totally amazing.
I wonder, it occurs to me that you might have someone who goes on and opens their own place, and you go to their place and you think, wow, I wish they'd done this for me.
Sure, yeah. But, that's... they want to go out there and...
Well, I don't mean that like you think that they should have done it for you, but maybe you didn't even see quite the scope of what they could do.
Absolutely. I've definitely been surprised by a few people who I didn't think had it in them. And then you sort of question yourself as a manager. You're like, wow, did I miss something in that person? Because look what they've gone off and done. There are a couple that have come through that didn't quite mesh with me, but went on to do amazing things.
In managing 5 restaurants, it's got to be incredibly, incredibly stressful. I mean, even when it's going really smoothly.
Yeah.
So do you have a way in which you find some quiet in your life? I mean, I notice one thing being your friend is you almost never talk about work, and I'm really impressed by that.
Yeah, I don't, it's something, I leave it there, for sure. I've learned to manage it. I mean, I think I used to just be so stressed out, and I used to be super crazy. The sort of the Gordon Ramsays that you see on TV, that's real. I mean, those like characters do exist. I don't know whether he's like that because I haven't worked with him, but I've worked with people like that. Back in the 80s when I came up through the kitchens, it was sort of this management style. There was no management style. People didn't think about how to manage people. They were really crazy, really forceful.
Sounds like Wild Kingdom.
It was Wild Kingdom. I mean, it was, fist fights and, people bashing each other in the faces. And, it was like really crazy. And when you get into a kitchen environment and you have people behaving like that, it's super frightening because they have knives and they have pots and pans and they've got hot grease.
Liquids, right.
And, it was just always like, that was sort of this, it was the pressure cooker that was about to blow all the time. And, super long hours, very stressful. And, I was kind of like that. I mean, I was, up until I opened Jardiniere, I was known to be pretty aggressive and mean. Right. And, I guess, to survive in those kitchens, I had to have a little bit of that going on because that's what the kitchens were like.
Right.
And
until you could build your own kitchen culture.
Yeah. Sort of set that aside. So anyway, my point being that I think I learned how to sort of pull back from that and not behave like that. And so there's a lot of control and sort of, just learning how to let go of stuff because it's like you have to learn to walk away. Like when you get to that boiling point where you feel like you're going to, completely lose it.
Right.
You have to have some way to pull yourself back from that.
So you're opening another restaurant in September. That'll make it 6 establishments you're running.
Yes.
You're going to take a little time off after that?
I don't know. It depends on what opportunities come my way.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
All right. Tracy, thank you so much.
Thanks, Adam.
It's been great.